So in this lecture, we are going to see a geometric proof for Borsuk-Ulam theorem. So to start recalling, just a second. So to start with, let's recall the version BU1b of Borsuk-Ulam theorem that said that if you have any continuous antipodal mapping from Sn to Rn, then it is certainly having a zero, okay? Which means there is a point x in Sn such that f of x is zero. So just to fix some notations, let Sn be the subset of Rn plus 1 satisfying that summation xi squares is 1. So it is the standard sphere, n sphere, which we know in Rn plus 1. And now let's define a map G from Sn to Rn, which is a north pole projection, north pole, south pole projection. So what it really does is that it takes all the n plus 1 points and projects it down to the first n points. Okay, and to do the shorthand, I'm going to denote such a point by x bar. And so depending on which dimension we are working in, x bar might mean x1, x2, xn plus 1 or x1, x2, xn. Okay, so this is the north-south projection. It takes both north pole and south pole to the same first n coordinates. Entire third last coordinate is chopped. Okay, and now consider a cylinder over Sn, which means you take the space Sn and product it with the closed interval 0, 1, and we define a homotopy f from this Sn cross 0, 1 to Rn such that on the bottom sphere it is defined as gx, on the top sphere it is defined as fx, and since this is going to be a continuous space, you have this as a valid map. So here this f is the same which I have started off with, assuming that this is a continuous map which is antipodal. Okay, so since I know that f is antipodal, which means f of minus x is minus of fx, and the antipodal mapping on Sn which sends x to minus x, I can extend this antipodal mapping of Sn to nu, and that I mean that I would be sending x comma t to minus x comma t. Okay, so recall this x bar, or rather under bar, is actually the tuple x1, x2, xn plus 1. Okay, and this is then called the antipodality on x. X is the space Sn cross I. So the map which we have defined here, f capital F, as 1 minus t times gx plus tfx, if you notice what happens on f with respect to this nu is, so f of nu of xt is going to be f of minus xt, because nu sends any point x comma t to the antipodal on x and t remains unchanged. And by definition, f of minus x comma t is 1 minus t times g of minus x plus t times f of minus x. And since g is antipodal, you can check clearly. It just takes whatever it is, it will just come out as it is, right? So g of minus x is going to be minus of gx, and f is given to be antipodal, so f of minus x is minus of fx. So this entire expression is this, and this is nothing but minus of fxt. So f is also antipodal with respect to this map nu, which was the antipodality on x. Okay. So to see the picture for this f, we'll return back to this image. But for now, what if, let's say n is equal to 1, so Sn is just a circle. So you take a circle, you do times I, so it becomes a cylinder. On the bottom it is g, because f is 1 minus t times gx. So at t equal to 0, this vanishes, you have just gx. At t equal to 1, this vanishes and you have fx, right? So you have, on the bottom it is defined as g, on the top it is defined as f. This is the entire space x, and in between f, what it does, it really joins the segments. Okay, so keeping this in mind, what we have to do is we have to show that f has zeros. So suppose it doesn't have, okay, and we should arrive at a contradiction. What we are going to do, we are going to examine the space z of zeros of the function f. So z is the space f inverse of 0, 0 bar, okay. So clearly n0 and s0 are in z, where n is the north pole and s is the south pole of Sn. This is clear, right? If you are putting t is equal to 0 in the definition of f, so t equal to 0 means that f of x0 is just the g of x, and g has 0 exactly at the north pole and the south pole. Okay, so f inverse 0 definitely contains the north pole comma 0 and south pole comma 0. These 2 points are certainly there. Now notice that the function f is assumed to have no zeros. Okay, so by compactness of Sn, there is a point epsilon positive such that f of x is positive for every point in Sn. And this implies that one can approximate f by a smooth map. Okay, so instead of looking at f, I would as well just look at the function which is having these antipodal continuous property and is a smooth map. So I would assume that f itself is smooth. All right. Now we note that g is anyway smooth. Okay, that is clear. And once g is smooth, f is smooth, I know that the function f is going to be smooth. Okay. Therefore, f can also be approximated by an affine mapping. So locally, f can be defined from Rn plus 1 to Rn instead of Sn cross I to Rn. Okay, locally you can do this. Okay, I am just going to use shorthand FL for f locally. So since this is approximating f, I know that FL inverse of 0 is non-empty because f inverse of f is non-empty. It has n0 and s0 as at least 2 points in it. And now once I know that f inverse L is not, f inverse L of 0 is non-empty, I know that this is a subspace of dimension at least 1. Okay. Now, if I perturb f a little, the smooth version which I started with this assumption I am proceeding, because I can always assume that f is smooth because of all this reasoning. So arbitrary small perturbation in f will imply that f is sufficiently generic. Okay, I should have written generic here. Just give me a minute. Yeah. So f is sufficiently generic, and hence f inverse L is either empty or is a subspace of dimension 1. Okay. And once you know this, then clearly Z is a union of closed cycles or paths whose endpoints would lie in the boundary. So let's come to the picture now. Oops, this is moving. Okay, let it be. So we come back and see the structure Z in the picture which we saw earlier. And in this, you see that if let's say this is the South Pole, this is the North Pole, then these pictures that you see in the maroonish color, these are possible subspaces in Z. Either these are closed curves like this, which are going to be, of course, if you have on this side, symmetrically on the opposite side, you will have because of the map new. And if there is a path, then it is going to end only at the boundaries, and it goes, rest of it goes on surfaces. Okay, so Z is a union of these closed cycles or paths whose endpoints line the boundaries. That is t equal to 0 or t equal to 1. It might have as well be here also. But notice that in either case, you will never have a wide type of a structure. You will not have three sort of line segments emanating from one point. Okay, these are things like if let's say you're standing here, half of this is here, half of this is here, so you have two directions to go. At here, at this point, you have one direction to go, but you will never have possibly a thing like this, this, and this. Okay, this is not possible. So with this coming down, so already we know that f has no zeros. So f of x1 cannot be 0 because f of x1 means here f of x comma 1 means this vanishes. You will have just the f of small f of x. So if capital F of x comma 1 is 0, then that would mean that small f of x is 0, and that is not possible by assumption because f does not have any zeros. Okay, so this cannot vanish for any point x in Sn. However, capital F of n comma 0 and s comma 0 are 0 because g of n and g of s are 0, and for no other x it is going to be 0. That you can also check. Just expand out what that would imply, and if this is 0 for any other x, you are going to get that f is 0. Okay, so I have that f of x comma 0 is 0 for only the points North Pole and the South Pole. So there is a unique path gamma connecting the North Pole to South Pole. Okay, starting from one of this and ending at this through the curve. But remember the map knew the antipodality on x. So that is going to give a symmetric path from S to N, right? And that does not exist because if you start with a point from here and start moving, and you symmetrically start moving from this point, there is no way you can meet and come back to it such that the symmetricity is followed. Okay, and this gives me a contradiction, and hence the continuous antipodal map F should have a 0. Okay. If you see the book Bourse-Coulomb using Borsuk-Ulam theorem by Matusek, you will notice that this entire proof is given in two parts. First, they do it for F and then they make it precise by actually doing what this perturbation, actually showing how this perturbation can be obtained. Okay, so to do that, what is done is you start with a homeomorphic n-dimensional sphere, which you define via L1 norm. So to recall, L1 norm of any n tuple, or here n plus 1 tuple, takes the summation of their modulus values. And so whenever this modulus value is 1, you say that that is defining the n sphere. Okay, so if let's say you are in R2, if you are in R2 like this, x and y axis, then you are going to get this as your S1 hat. Okay, similarly when you go to R3, your S2 hat is going to be the surface of the regular octahedron. So on this, let's say if you have drawn another dimension here and another dimension here, take a point at the distance 1 and take the suspension with that point at the distance 1 and at the point -1 here. If you have taken that suspension, that is what gives you the S2 hat. So instead of the regular Sn, we consider the Sn hat and take the triangulation of Sn hat, define the triangulation for the upper part of the Sn hat, lower part, and make it refined enough so that the map nu, which we defined here as the antipodality on X, can make sense. Okay, this particular, you would still choose the same X as Sn hat times I hat now and do the rest of it. Okay, so you can look that up, and this is using the same ideas but doing it through the language of simplicial complexes, taking all the triangulations and doing enough subdivisions using barycentric subdivision, etc. Okay, so in the next lecture, we'll see the Tucker's lemma, which is called the discrete version of this particular theorem. This, as you can see, is a geometric theorem. Okay, and just like a topological version, it has a combinatorial version, and that version is named as Tucker's lemma. So I will show you what it is, how it is equivalent to Borsuk-Ulam theorem, and then we'll see a proof for the Tucker's lemma in the next lecture. Okay.